the car before I open my eyes. The air is blue-black, brown-black, black-black. Smell of gas, oil, animals. I'm in the trunk. My wrists and ankles tied, tape over my mouth. It almost covers my nose, but I can breathe barely. I must have been here for hours. Everything is stiff. And my head throbs like someone's drumming on china. The car stops. He turns off the motor, but there are no traffic sounds, no people sounds, no wind. What place has no wind? I turn my head towards the sounds like people watch radios when something terrible happens. My palms are sweating. Where am I? The trunk squeaks as he lifts it up and the sun blinds me. He almost looks like a faceless Jesus surrounded by light. Pulls me out of the trunk and bangs my head against the door. I try to cry out, but it comes like a hum. He drags me half standing along a dirt road into a house. I can't see any other houses and it looks like a farm. The screen door bangs behind me and I feel a deep, deep pressure inside. All the rules have changed here. I'm dragged down a hall like a bag and I look for a phone, other doors. Nothing but bare floors and brown boxes in small rooms. He pulls me into the bathroom and I almost crack my head as he pushes me onto the floor. He tilts his head to the side and gazes at me as if I was a pet, then walks out. I'm lying there for a long time trying to get the tape off of me. My eyes are tearing. I don't make a sound. I can't get up and I keep rolling from side to side, trying not to make noise. If I can get him to talk to me, if I can get this thing on my face, I can talk to him. I'll tell him my name. Have you killed other women in here? I'm thinking you've got hundreds of them nailed down, hung on walls, hanging from ceiling fans, swinging dead in summer wind. Why did he pick me? If I'd stayed to finish at the library, I would have been there 20 minutes longer. Maybe I'd have been okay. Would have rushed into the house, books piled up in my arms like a baby and blurting explanations why I was sorry. So sorry I'm late, everyone. Would you have waited for me anyway? Would you have picked another woman? Would I read about her in the paper and said, oh my God, I was there that night? Called all my friends in a panic, telling them how much I love them as if I'd never have the chance again. I wonder what everyone is doing now. Putting up signs, showing my picture on the evening news, calling old friends. Maybe I'm not even considered missing yet. My family will fall apart and my parents will go crazy, slowly. My brother will be so quiet at the funeral and insist the casket be closed. I never even told anyone what kind of funeral I wanted when I died. Maybe years from now they'll find my skeleton on the floor here and they'll have to use dental records to identify me. My family will say, at least we know now. We always hoped she was alive somewhere. We just hope she's in peace. When I sleep, my dreams are crazy. I'm flying over fields. I don't think I sleep for more than 20 minutes. When I wake up, it feels like I'm under a heavy blanket. I'm still here. As I wake up, I hear a dog barking in the distance, and I think I'm in my parents' house in South Carolina. When I open my eyes, there's a shotgun pressed between them. I'll never get married. I'll never have kids. I'll never go to Europe. I'll never learn to play a piano. I'll never write a book. The last thing I hear is a click.
Welcome to the Last Minute Show. Today I plan to play you Giselle Vian's radio play Jerk, because last month I talked about Giselle Vian and how I liked her piece and my essay on her, and I thought that this month it would be appropriate to continue that theme, but something happened and I just couldn't not talk about this thing that happened. On February 13th, a burnt body was found in the outskirts of Mersin, one of the southern cities of Turkey, and this burnt body belonged to a young woman. It was discovered, named Özge Can Aslan. It was the body's hands was mutilated as well, and it turned out that she was raped and stabbed to death a couple of times, and then burned and dumped in the forest. And the murderer is the driver of the minibus that she took to go to home from her school, and his accomplices were his father and his friend. It was revealed, and the terror of this event affected the whole country, frankly, and it received a lot of protests and mass reaction from the population. And sometimes, the discussions and the debates are not quite in the direction of where any woman or any feminist would like it to be, because it's again, it gets very patriarchal at one point. Like, people are screaming for the restitution of capital punishments for these people, or still a lot of politicians, and especially male politicians, but also like sometimes female politicians or semi-politicians, like public speakers or such, they claim that this murder is not political. We shouldn't be politicizing this. There's this very wild murder at hand, and politicizing it is very disrespectful for the dead woman. It's as if trying to use this death for dirty agendas. They are trying to reflect it as such. But we know that, at least I can enumerate myself in this as a feminist. We know that this murder, like a lot of other murders, are very political, a very direct result of patriarchal and conservative society, and the politics that trying to change and shape the society in the ideology of this continuation of the family structure and their sense of morality in a way. And right now, this huge wave of reactions to her death, I feel should be directed towards more radical discussions of how to fight with male violence, because it's always male violence, how to fight with male violence and how to fight with patriarchy and this political pressure on people, on women, to conform their lives to the family structure. Our prime minister has numerous times infamously said that I don't believe in the equality of women and men, for example. Like, he used the term equivalence, something like that. I don't know. Like, this is very demagogical, of course, but he's always like saying these things and blurring, the field of discussion, like public deliberations. He's deliberately losing the ground of woman-oriented politics, woman-oriented policies. And also, like, a lot of people from this ruling party are claiming that women should do this, women shouldn't do that, they shouldn't do abortion, they shouldn't love, they shouldn't wear these dresses, they shouldn't take alcohol, and it also, like, they're always prescribing the woman to marry, to bear children, and how holy is the woman that becomes a mother instead of working. All these, like, discourses are abound. And also oh my god, I really can't talk about this without stuttering. And also, like, there are more edgy discourses about, like, the Islamic position of women, about their proper way of dressing, about their proper way of behavior, and the protection houses that were founded formerly for women that are victims of domestic violence, their numbers were decreased radically, and the ministry that's responsible for women was changed into ministry responsible for family. So the governments, especially the current government's envisioning of women, is not out of the family bounds in a way. I'm saying this because I'm aware that patriarchy and violence against women are not certainly limited to the ruling party's period. However, they are very, consciously, very cold-bloodedly increased and, in a way, motivated this kind of these burdens, these limitations and traps that already surrounded women in a way. In the judiciary system, the domestic violence, the violence against women, the crimes against women like rape, murder, or physical violence, all of these crimes are always the punishments are always decreased. For example, like when the criminal of these cases, they when they come to the jury in a very, like with tie and, with a suit or something, like a very in a superficial way, the judges decide that this person is well-intended, has well behaviors, and also they think that if the woman is dressed with a skirt. If the woman is outside after, let's say, 9 p.m., if the woman has taken alcohol, if the woman has known the guilty person before, all of these things, if these things are the case, they immediately try to decrease the punishment that's due, because they think that they're the term for this is that how can I translate it? Let me check. But there's a term for this. Like there's a recourse for the judiciary system to apply and to basically continue the cycle of violence around women. Okay, the term is mitigant circumstance, I guess. That's what the dictionary says. So all the mitigant circumstances are around the woman's quote-unquote frivolity. So when you have this kind of judiciary system, this kind of laws, you can't even like have one glimpse of justice after all these women are killed and murdered. And so now people are like claiming that the capital punishment should come, but the laws are not even applied properly. For example, a judge can decide that a 13-year-old girl raped by 26 men, including like imams, teachers, highly superiors, and prominent people from society. A 13-year-old girl raped by 26 men could have resisted this rape, and she seems to have been willing for this sexual intercourse. This is an official decision that's given like in the recent years, like it's not too old, like 2 years ago or a year ago. So even the laws that should have been applied very strictly, very pro woman, they're not applied. So capital punishment for such crimes will only be used as an excuse for eliminating the members of society that the power wants to eliminate. Because in Turkey, judiciary system and the ruling system are not divided. They are basically controlled. They work together. It's always ideological, the decisions, because the police can take whoever it wants, and usually they don't catch the criminals but the politically active people, the people that they want to torture. So all these rape cases, the murders and the violence against women, they're always political, because they always go unpunished. The impunity motivates the criminals. Like those people, for example, who killed their wives, when interviewed by journalists, they interestingly always say that, I was told that I was going to punished for less years. Like people actually talk about these things, like how many years will I be punished with in jail if I kill my wife. And people also they give suggestions to each other to do that. They motivate each other. They think that the judiciary system will punish them in a very bearable way. And in a way, for us, it still does. But for these murders, even 12 years is too much. They think it's longer than what they should have taken, what they were told when they started thinking of this crime. So this is the situation right now, and today I haven't read the news because I thought that I would really lose it. But today the prime minister, former prime minister, the new president Erdogan, told that the feminists are really manipulating this murder. I didn't read the rest, but it's been 4 days since we learned about this murder, and he can't even shut up and just do what he needs to do, which is to assure women that from now on new security measurements will be taken to make them feel safe, like more for example protection houses will open or something like that. But no, he attacks feminists, which happen to be women, after the killing, and a violent killing of a woman. So when the picture is like this, it's very hard to stay sane. And it's a shame actually on my part that I didn't bring this up before, because since the last year, I'm realizing that what we are living through in Turkey is not just regular crimes against women. It's almost like a genocide, because the women that's the numbers of women murdered and raped, murdered, and either in family, from someone in family or out, the statistics are really huge. So let me give you some numbers. Although I have no way of verifying the numbers, cross-checking the numbers in a way, because the document that I found, it's an answer to a petition in the Parliament House, like a questionnaire about the numbers of women that died with murder. And this is the answer by the Ministry of, I guess, Justice, given to this petition. But these are not the result of, I guess, meticulous statistics, because a sociologist cross-checked the numbers with other documents that he found, and he was suspicious of the verity of these results. But it doesn't matter. I don't think that there will be huge differences if it's cross-checked. And even the half of these numbers, it is very maddening. So the numbers are like, in 2002, they announced that the women murdered, the numbers of women murdered is 66, which can be dubious because, later on it increases exponentially. So I don't know, maybe the categorizations change. In 2003, it's 83. In 2004, it's 164. In 2005, it's 317. In 2006, it's 663. In 2007, it's 1011. In 2008, it's 806. In 2009, in the first 7 months of 2009, it is 953. Just in the past 3 months, I guess, the numbers of women that's murdered are more than 100. Last year also, like a data that I found says 287 women murdered whose names we know. Like, there are also cases that we can't reach, like it's not shared with the public. And the police station and the justice ministry, they refuse to give the statistics and the names of the victims. And the domestic violence, the victims of domestic violence out of these numbers that I enumerated are, in 2009 it's 171, 2010 it's 177, in 2011 it's 163, and in the first 9 months of 2012 it's 125. I mean, this is a consistent statistic, as one can see, and even if the murders are not from the domestic members of the family, the perpetrators are usually, the criminals are usually someone that the women already know, like their lovers or their acquaintances and so on, or former husbands usually. So I think it's very appropriate to talk about a femicide here that repeats itself, that continues. And I arrived at the term, I was introduced to the term through the women victims of Ciudad Juarez. It's a border town in Mexico. And these women are workers in maquiladoras, which are basically sweatshops. And the maquiladoras are the factories of international companies, actually, trying to avoid taxation by opening their factories in the border of Mexico, and also trying to employ very cheap labor. And they are usually unregulated by the Mexican government. They avoid any kind of, examination. And so they're already worked to death. But what happens is that these women, when they return their home, which are like slums that's far away from the factory area, when they return home on foot, basically, cars come close by and just snatch these women. They rape them, mutilate them, and leave them in the desert. Because the road between home and the factory is basically a desert and a highway. And the government doesn't do anything, any systematic investigation on this, because they basically just leave it as saying that this is a gang war, or these women are prostitutes, or like this is because of this drug wars between gangs. And neither of these excuses are not true, but even if they were, the government still is responsible for taking measurement and doing something, but they don't. They actually, slow down the cases opened after these women, because these are the in their view, these are the people that can be gotten rid of, like they can be casualties. They are not worthwhile to pursue a case after, to found the justice after. And since 1993, more than 370 women are killed like this. Like 12 years, 370 women. And people are already reacting to this very, in a very attentive way, especially the family members of these victim women, but also like academicians, researchers, and also several police investigators too. Like I guess I remember a documentary about a policewoman going after these killings, and after she found the remainings of a body, like bones. So there are also some people that really like go after this, and they frame this thing as a femicide. I think, in my opinion, the way that we frame this is very important to understand the extent of violence, understand the systematicity. So up until now, it's always, we have frames like crimes against women, of course, and also the tradition killings, the honor killings, the honor killings. We have this kind of frames, and the honor killings are mostly associated with the tribal violence against women, like the tribes that live in the eastern part of the country kill their daughters and their women when they think that they are defamed, when they think that they are, their honors are defamed. Yes, I guess I can't find another term for it. And what they mean by this is that the woman gets raped by a family member again, or someone else, but usually a family member, like an uncle or something. And then, rather than protecting her, they kill her to cleanse the defamation from the family's name. I also have to add that the incestual rape is highly common, not only in these like tribal, traditional large families, but also like in every part of the country. So honor killings are associated with this kind of violence, and I think it's a way of locking away of this crime that's actually very prevalent. They want to think that it's only like this tribal, this back-minded, quote-unquote, people that do such a thing. Educated people don't do such a thing. But no, in every city in Turkey, especially in the biggest cities like Istanbul, Ankara, Izmir, the crimes against women are high because the crisis of malehood, patriarchy is everywhere in Turkey. So I thought that honor killings are not enough to represent this shocking, consisting violence and murder of women. So from now on my part, personally, I will refer to what's going on in Turkey as a femicide, as an ongoing femicide or genocide. because it's ongoing. Every day we hear a new name, and they're always like names, and we don't know much more about what's going on because the media doesn't cover enough. So from this moment on, I will refer to this as a femicide, as an ongoing femicide that should be more and more politicized. Actually, like it's a war against half of the population. That's what it is. That's not some, like some incident that's happening in this or that city. It's very consistent because the understanding is that the not only that women are fragile or can be killed, it's not only that, but also like the male members of this country are they see that it's their right to punish women. It's their right to kill this woman. It's their right to rape this woman. It's their right to mutilate this woman. The killing by mutilation, even that is becoming now common. Like the wholeness of the body, it's not even a limit for these criminals. And these people are not, like lunatics. They're not. I think we can't lock them away from the sanity because they are sane. They are doing this in a very cold-blooded way, and they even defend their choices, what they do as choices. So this is war. The war is on. And I think for a while the women have to arm themselves. We have to arm ourselves in order to survive. And also, I guess, put a limit, like put a mark to make them understand that this is what's going on. So now there's this website called Anıtsayaç, ANITSAYAC.com. It's also available in English. This website is updated by the names of women, murdered women, and the names are not retrieved from the police station or the Ministry of Justice. They are rather the names that these independent participants of this website find in the media. So it's like to the extent that these murders are represented in the media, unfortunately, and this is a huge limitation because it doesn't represent, for example, the full numbers of victims, or like, again, not all of them, and the reasons why they were murdered, or the ways of the murder, the arms that used, so on and so forth. They're not, these kind of information are not fully represented in the website. But nevertheless, it's even in this, like half down form, the website is still very scary, actually. So for the next half an hour, I just want to read the names of these women in these websites. I don't want to comment on anything. I just want to read the names as I don't know, I can't bring myself to say commemoration, but just I don't know, like I'm at the point where the commentary is no more possible. The more I speak, the more I feel like I'm ridiculous, actually. So the list starts with the name Dilek Avcı, murdered in 2008 by her lover after an argument, and the way of murder is choking to death. Pipa Bakka, maybe you already heard of her. She was this artist that wanted to do a peace walk through Italia to Middle East, I guess, the final destination. And while she was passing through Turkey, she was raped and choked to death by an unknown person in 2008, and the punishment of the murder is decreased. And why it's decreased, it's not known. These information are never shared with public. Gülceren Karakaş, she's killed in 2008. Why or by whom she is killed, we don't know. She was stabbed to death. Sabire Akçakaya, killed in 2008. Her sister-in-law, her uncle, and the son of her uncle killed her by torture, by mutilation. She was 11 years old. Hatice Demir was killed by her husband by torture in 2008. Türkan Korkmaz was killed by her lover and his friends by torture because she didn't want to have sex with them in the forest. Asiye F. She was killed by her son in 2008 through torture. Saniye Özkan was killed in 2008 by her son through torture on the excuse that she was an addict. Emine Badıllı was killed in 2008 by her husband through torture and mutilation on the excuse of jealousy. Sevilay Taşdemir was killed in 2008 by her husband. She was stabbed to death on the excuse of jealousy. Pınar Özdemir was killed in 2008 by her husband. She was stabbed to death. The excuse was divorce, and actually she made an official demand to be protected by the government. Dilek Bozkına was it says it's a suicide, but I guess the suicide Yes, the suicide note says that the husband always beats her, so she couldn't stand it. So she put a rope on her neck, basically. Basically. Yeah, in 2008. Until I go to the 2009, it's always 2008. Yeter Karabulut was killed by her lover on the excuse of jealousy with a fire gun. Menekşe Karahan was killed by a fire gun by the lover of her daughter. Sultan Hanedar was killed by her husband on the excuse of the economical crisis and unemployment, and the way of murder is not known. Nimet Küçük Yılmaz was killed by her husband by a fire gun. Medine Kızmaz was killed by her husband and her or his, it's not clear, her or his brothers by a firearm on the excuse that she wanted to divorce. Fatma Aktaş was killed by her relative on the excuse that the murderer needed money. She was choked to death. Aysel Çadır was killed by her lover. She made a demand for official protection, but it's not granted. She was killed by a firearm. Zöhre Güneli was killed by her husband with a sharp object. Fatma Babatlı was killed by her husband on the excuse of divorce with a firearm, and she made an official demand for protection. Şenur Özkan was killed by her husband on the excuse of divorce by an axe. Emine Akay was killed by her father with a sharp object. Ayşe Yalçın was killed by someone she doesn't know, stabbed to death. Elmas Yıldız was killed by her son. She was stabbed to death. Aycan Baran was killed by her neighbor with torture. Münire Yılmaz was killed by her religiously married husband with stabbing. Hatice Ekti was killed by her husband with a firearm on the excuse of economical crisis and unemployment. Sultan Kocakaya was killed by her son. She was stabbed. Sıdıka Karakış was killed by her stepson with an axe. Binevş Yürekli was killed by her husband. She was stabbed. Tuğçe Ayata was killed by her husband. She was choked to death. Has Hatun Danışmaz was killed by her husband on the excuse of divorce, and she had an official claim for protection. She was killed by a firearm. Gönül Özcan was killed by her daughter's husband with a firearm on the excuse of crisis and unemployment. Emel Çalış was killed by her ex-lover, ex-boyfriend, on the excuse of refusal. She was killed by a firearm. Sevil Sayan was killed by her husband. She was thrown from a building. From a hotel, actually, the 7th floor of a hotel. Nuray Vardar was killed by her husband on the excuse of jealousy with a firearm. Kadriye Acar was killed by her husband, and it says she jumped to death, but it's suspicious because the husband might have thrown her from the building. Durdu Karataş was killed by her husband. She was choked. Yeliz Özdoğru was killed by someone she knows, and the reason is rape and then murder, and she was murdered by a sharp object. Emine Akkaya is killed by her cousin. She was killed by a chainsaw. She was mutilated with a chainsaw. Sever Ölmez is killed by her religiously married husband when she refused the man, for sexual intercourse, and he choked her to death. Fadime Durmuş is killed by her son with torture on the excuse of crisis and unemployment. Serpil Aydoğdu was killed by her husband on the excuse of divorce, and she was stabbed. Gizem Kılıç is killed by her neighbor. She was stabbed to death. And the link is broken, but I guess it's attempted or accomplished rape. Kadın Kalem. She was killed by her husband on the excuse of jealousy. She was stabbed. Dilek Saner was killed by her ex-husband on the excuse of divorce. She made an official demand for protection. She was stabbed. Nazime Sango. She was killed by her elder brother, with a firearm. İlknur Gelen was killed by her husband with a firearm. İlknur İslam. She was killed by her neighbor. The reason is given as sorry, I need to check the link. It's not clean. I guess it's a theft, attempted theft. And also I'm learning that her daughter and son also stabbed to death. But the theft is by this neighbor. Alev Kara is killed by her husband. She was stabbed, and also their two daughters are stabbed too. Döne Ashut was killed by her son. I guess the son demanded money from her, and she was tortured. Binnur Çiçek is killed by a firearm. She was a dancer, and the murderer is unknown. Çağla Alin was killed by her friend with a sharp object on the excuse that she refused him. Tülay Gürsoy was killed by her husband on the excuse of jealousy with a firearm. Pınar Keskin was killed by her husband for money with torture. I guess it also includes mutilation. Asya Yavuz is killed by her sorry, I need to find the term. Brother-in-law, sister's husband, or uncle-in-law. It's not clear. With a firearm. With a, I guess, attempted rape. No, sorry. Aseus was killed by her brother-in-law with a firearm while she was protecting her sister, who wanted to have a divorce from this man. Beyhan Yavuz was killed by her religiously married husband on the excuse of refusal, the firearm. Şerife Hicret Rençber was killed by her stepfather with a firearm. Tuğba Rençber was killed by her religiously married husband on the excuse of separation with a firearm. Ayşe Sel was killed by her father from choking to death. Fatma Topgöden was killed by her husband with torture on the excuse of crisis and unemployment. Uğur Turgut was killed by her lover on the excuse of money, and the way of murder is not known. Necla Çiltik was killed by her. By the way, this is now 2009. From now on, she was killed by her son. Necla Çiltik was killed by her son with a sharp object. Alyona Kisakova was killed by her husband. When she refused group sex with a club, basically. Ayşe Köse was killed by her husband on the excuse of jealousy. She was beaten to death. Meryem Özgen was killed by her husband on the excuse of jealousy. She was beaten to death. Hatice Taptık was killed by her husband on the excuse of jealousy. She was stabbed. Necimiye Cankurt was killed by her husband on the excuse of divorce. She was stabbed to death. İlknur I was killed by her husband on the excuse of jealousy. She was stabbed to death. Rabia Akkılıç was killed by her husband with a firearm on the excuse of crisis and unemployment. Behrin Akmansoluk was killed by her husband on the excuse of separation. The way of murder is not known. Meral Yıldırım was killed by her husband on the excuse of jealousy with a firearm. Selda A was killed by her husband on the excuse of jealousy. The way of murder is not known, although it's the murderer tried to make it seem like a suicide. Ferfuri Akbaş was killed by her husband on the excuse of jealousy with a firearm. Özlem Pamukçu was killed by her husband on the excuse of jealousy. She was stabbed to death. Meryem Galip was killed by her husband on the excuse of jealousy. She was stabbed to death. Özlem Özcan K was killed by her husband on the excuse of divorce. She demanded official protection. It wasn't granted. The way of murder is not known. Şükran Aydar was killed by her husband. She was murdered with a firearm. Dilek Dashtanoğlu was killed by her husband on the excuse of divorce with a firearm. Esra Ulu was killed by her husband on the excuse of jealousy. And her husband claimed that she was unfaithful, but it wasn't true. She was stabbed to death. Belgin Demir was killed by her husband on the excuse of separation, and the way of killing is not known. Yeter Sertkaya was killed by her husband. The man cut her neck, her throat, in front of her children when she decided to divorce, I guess. Gülbin Şah Yirci was killed by her husband on the excuse of jealousy. She was stabbed from 25 points. Sevim Kutlu was killed by her husband on the excuse of jealousy with a firearm. Berna Tekinalp was killed by her husband on the excuse of separation. She claimed official protection. It wasn't granted. She was killed with a firearm. By the way, when I don't mention the official protection, it means that there's no demand for it, which is also a very important aspect of this femicide, because the government doesn't inform the people that the women that they can actually benefit from this protection. And even when they apply for it, as you hear, it's usually not granted. Sonay Konarç was killed by her husband on the excuse of jealousy. She was stabbed. Esen Gül was killed by her husband on the excuse of jealousy. She was stabbed. Meryem Toma was killed by her husband on the excuse of divorce with a sharp object. Her throat was cut. Halime Türkan was killed by her husband on the excuse of jealousy, and the way of murder is not known. Esra Koç was killed by her husband on the excuse of jealousy. She was stabbed. Oya Ertaş was killed by her husband on the excuse of money. She was killed with a sharp object. Yeter Topçu was killed by her husband on the excuse of jealousy. She was tortured and mutilated. And the husband's family helped him. Ayfer Özbaşaran was killed by her husband with a firearm on the excuse of crisis and unemployment. He also killed their 2 children. Seda Kabaşar was killed by her husband on the excuse of divorce with a firearm. Firdevs De was killed by her husband on the excuse of jealousy. She was choked. Arzu Civil was killed by her husband on the basis of jealousy. She was stabbed. Fatma Tekin was killed by her husband on the excuse of crisis and unemployment. She was killed with a firearm. Kader Sağlam was killed by her husband on the excuse of divorce. She was killed with a firearm. Gülseren Serin was killed by her husband on the excuse of divorce with a lethal object. Münevver Karabulut was killed by her boyfriend on the excuse of jealousy. She was tortured and mutilated, and the boy's family accomplice him. This case was also very shocking because basically what the boy did was, and his name is Cem Garipoğlu if you're interested. Cem Garipoğlu cut her in two, and he put her body in a guitar case and he dumped the body in trash. And the boy and his family, they are very rich, and they tried to cover up this murder, and the boy actually escaped from the police for, I guess, months. And he actually committed a suicide, and people are actually suspicious of it. In 2 or 3 months ago. Zeynep Kamil Gülaras was killed by her lover boyfriend when she wanted, I guess, to separate. She was tortured. Gül Bozkurt was killed by her ex-fiancé on the excuse of separation with a firearm. Burcu Güçlü was killed by her friend on the excuse of money. She was tortured. Mine Alagöz was killed by a serial killer, I guess. I'm sorry, the name of the woman is Mine Elagöz. By a serial killer who also was tried for rape and harassment back in 1989. Tuğçe Anlaş was killed by her ex-boyfriend on the excuse of jealousy with a sharp object. Ayşenur Acar was killed by someone she knows. She was stabbed. Ayşe Ayvaz was killed by her ex-boyfriend on the excuse of separation with a firearm. Gülay Akbaş was killed by her boyfriend on the excuse of jealousy. She was choked to death. Müjgan Öz was killed by her ex-boyfriend on the excuse of separation. She was stabbed to death. Kübra Kocatürk was killed by someone she knows with a sharp object. She was raped. She was stabbed from 25 points, and also her throat is cut. And the murderer is the friend of her husband. Şehime Bahçe. She was killed on the excuse of jealousy by the man that presses her to engage in sexual relationship in exchange for money. She was stabbed to death. Ayşe Çal was killed, and the murder and the way of murder and the excuse, all of these things are unknown. Songül Toraman Tekin. Again, the murderer, the way of murder, the excuse for murder, it's unknown. Also, her two children is found dead. She was choked, I guess. İlgin Özalp was killed by her ex-boyfriend on the excuse of separation. She was killed by a firearm. Esra Karsal was killed by her boyfriend on the excuse of jealousy. She was choked to death. Fatma Can Kurt was killed by a firearm, but by whom and why is unknown. Ayşegül Gürpınar was killed by, again, choking with a rope. The murder is unknown. Gamze Şenay was killed by her ex-boyfriend on the excuse of separation. She was stabbed to death. Meryem Çimen was killed by her ex-boyfriend on the excuse of separation. She was stabbed to death. Arzu Çakmakçı Erbaş was killed by unknown. She was stabbed to death, and the excuse is money. Nurdan Çiftçi was killed by her boss. She was a dancer in a club on the excuse of jealousy. The way of murder is unknown. Filiz Karataş was killed by her ex-husband on the excuse of separation with a sharp object. Zeynep Güneri was killed by her ex-husband on the excuse of refusal with a firearm. Ayşe Seferoğlu was killed by her ex-husband on the excuse of refusal with a knife, with stabbing. Seher Hashimoğlu was killed by her ex-husband on the excuse of separation She had an official demand for protection. She used to be in a protection house, but as soon as she left the protection house after a period, she was killed with a firearm on the excuse of honor, the honor tradition killings. Ayşe Topaloğlu was killed by her boyfriend on the excuse of separation. She was stabbed to death. Zübeyde Yıldız was killed by her ex-husband on the excuse of divorce. She made an official claim for protection. It wasn't granted. She was stabbed to death. Emine Karadağ was killed by her ex-husband on the excuse of separation. She was killed with a firearm. Sefaniye Altun was killed by her ex-husband on the excuse of divorce. She was killed by a firearm. Ayşe Yalçın was killed. The murder is unknown. She was stabbed from 20 places. No, the perpetrator is known, I guess. The link now says she used to be a sex worker, and one of her clients killed him, basically. Derya Gün was killed by her ex-husband on the excuse of separation. She was killed with a firearm, and the murderer planned this murder while he was already in jail for another crime. Zübeyde Dinç was killed by her ex-husband on the excuse of jealousy. She was choked to death. Didar Hayta was killed by her ex-boyfriend on the excuse of separation. She was killed with a firearm. Yonca Güngördü was killed by her lover on the excuse of jealousy. She was stabbed to death. İlyas Çağan was killed by the guy that pushed her to have sexual relationship in exchange for money. She was stabbed to death. And I guess it's a hate crime, so yes, the victim, İlyas Çağan, was a transsexual. Esra Akyüz was killed, someone she doesn't know. She was raped and then beaten to death. Zeynep Silke was killed by her ex-boyfriend on the excuse of separation. She was choked to death. Sevilay Beştepe was killed by her friend on the excuse of refusal with a firearm. Havva Akgır was killed by her boyfriend on the excuse of money. She was stabbed to death. Dilan Pirinç was killed by an unknown person on the excuse of money. She has an actual official claim for protection. It wasn't granted. She was stabbed to death. Özlem Işık was killed by her boyfriend. She was tortured and yes, she was mutilated and burned. Esra Çelekkulu, she was killed by her friend on the excuse of refusal. She was stabbed to death. Ülkü Ülken Zengin was killed by her boyfriend on the excuse of jealousy. She was killed by a firearm. She was shot 5 times. Yağmur Gölge was killed by her father on the excuse of jealousy. What is this? She was stabbed to death. Ayşe Yörük was killed by one of her relatives on the excuse of money. She was an old woman. She was beaten to death. Özlem Kuluk was killed one of her relatives on the excuse of separation. She was killed with a firearm. Gülfem Kuluk was killed by one of her relatives on the excuse of separation. She was killed with a firearm. I guess they're related. I'm sorry, the names are Özlem Kukuk and Gülfem Kukuk. Buse Han was killed by her uncle. She was raped and she got stabbed from 21 places. She was 14. Nazife Akbaş was killed by a relative. Her, I guess, grandson, on the excuse of honor, with a firearm. Tuğba B was killed by a relative on the excuse of jealousy with a firearm. Gamze Bulut was killed by a relative on the excuse of jealousy with a firearm. Ayşe Aydemir was killed by a relative on the excuse of jealousy with a firearm. Selva Üner was killed by a relative on the excuse of separation. She has an official claim for protection. It's given. She was killed with a firearm. As you see, even the protection houses are not secure enough, protective enough. And you can also see a pattern. Sometimes the reasons and ways of murders repeat themselves one after another. So it is a systematic thing going on. İlknur Ulusoy was killed by a relative on the excuse of jealousy with a firearm. Her father-in-law killed her. Filiz Tintaş was killed by a relative on the excuse of refusal. Her throat was cut. Hüsna Korkmaz was killed by a relative on the excuse of money with a sharp object. Gülsüm Semin was killed by the family council, her brother. This is an honor killing on the excuse of jealousy. And the way of murder is that she was beaten to death. Nurgül Akın is also a victim of honor killing. She was killed by her brother with the decision of family council on the excuse of jealousy. She was tortured. Meryem Kaçan is also a victim of honor killing. She was killed by her brother on the excuse of her divorce. She was stabbed to death. Gonca Gülköseoğlu was killed by her brother on the excuse of divorce. She was killed with a firearm. Medine Memi was killed by the family council, but who killed her is unknown. She was tortured. She had an official claim to protection, and it's given. And the reason is that when she wanted to give a decision on her life, usually this is divorce or or sometimes like work related or moving to another city, things like that. Zehra Taş was killed by someone she knows on the excuse of money. She was stabbed to death. Melek K was killed by she was a transsexual. She was killed by someone she knows. It's a hate crime, and she was stabbed to death. Eda Yıldırım was killed by someone she knows. She was found in a garbage container with her head cut. She was a transsexual. It's a hate crime. As you see, these hate crimes against transsexuals are also very prevalent, and I think they are also part of femicide. An important part of, and sometimes actually unmarked part of, due to the prevalent transphobia. Again, Serdar Şeran, a transvestite, was killed by someone he knows, she knows. Her throat was cut. Sinem Yurdanur was killed by her boyfriend in 2010. She was beaten to death. She was missing for 3 years actually. The body was found in 2013. Burcu Çağlayan was killed in 2010. From now on it's 2010. She was killed by her boyfriend. She was thrown from a building. And also her boyfriend's friend helped him. Azra Has, she was a transsexual, was killed by a firearm. Hicran U was killed by her boyfriend. She was stabbed to death after an argument. G.Ç. She was killed by allegedly her boyfriend with a firearm. She was a high school student. Dilek A was killed by her husband with a firearm. Ceren Cennet Demirtay was killed by her ex-boyfriend due to refusal his proposal. She was choked to death. Nergis Karataş was killed by her ex-boyfriend on the excuse of refusal with a firearm. Sevgi Kılıç was killed by someone she knows. So the link says that it's actually his father. It's an honor killing with a firearm. Ayşe Kılıç, like Sevgi Kılıç, was murdered in the same crime. Her father or husband. Let me check. Yes, her daughter. So she was killed by her father. With a firearm. Leyla Algan was killed by her ex-boyfriend. She was choked to death. Elif Şişman was killed by her friend on the excuse of unemployment. She was tortured. Her throat was cut. Meral Ergül was found dead in her home. The way of killing, his murder, they're not known. So for me, this is impossible to finish this huge list, even though even this is not the whole list of women murdered. I mean, I'm not even halfway through it, actually. I only could read you like 2008 and 2009 murders. And as I told you, even these things are not the whole picture, because these are the only ones that are represented in the media. And as you see, we don't know actually the full details of these murders. So I try to just represent a small glimpse of this femicide. And you might have realized that these murders are usually by always like this ex-husband, ex-boyfriend, boyfriend, relative. And they're always very violent, like including throat cutting, stabbing to death, or firearm, and usually these they have like multiple shots, not even one shot. It's like a huge eruption of violence in a way. And I don't know if it's about the order of the data entry. I don't know if it's strictly chronological, but you can see a pattern that the ways of murder are also copied by other people. So rather than the media coverage, I mean, as long as the media coverage is that superficial, it's not, how do you say, it's not, raising an awareness, but on the contrary, it's actually like gives ideas, I think, for other people to kill their wives in the same way. And the government, as I told you, is not doing anything to prevent these femicide. They're actually like always attacking women, or always trying to limit their lives, always trying to like give a lesson to them in one way or another. And this diminutory discourses actually gives the men the idea that they can do whatever they want to women. The women should obey their decisions and their demands. And when they refuse, they have the right to kill them, to execute these women. And I mean, the small information in these woman records, it doesn't, for example, mention the city, but I'm sure that it's in every city actually. Like so far as I could see in the links, like I have seen different cities from in every part of the country, so it's very prevalent and it's very common in general. Honestly, I don't know what to say. I guess this is it for today. I just wanted to draw your attention to the femicide going on in Turkey. This is very systematic. This is not, this can't be only examined under the title Crimes Against Women, because they're highly patterned, they're highly regular, they're actually increasing. So maybe in the next program I can talk about how the civil society organizations that try to fight against these crimes, or what can be done, what else can be done, or like how the artists answer to this femicide going on. Yes, so but I guess this is it for today. I'm really like speechless. So have a nice day if you can, and take care of yourselves for the next month, and see you. Goodbye.